Hey everyone, Eric Nelson here once again, and thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. Well, I am back with another book review, which I will be reviewing Oliver Stone's The Untold History of the United States. Now, before I go on, I should also mention that there is a co-author to this book too. His name is Peter Kunznick. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, here's the here is his name. So yeah. So anyway, now of course, based on the main author of the book, Oliver Stone, you could guess that this book is controversial. And as a matter of fact, I don't think it is, even though that some people are calling it controversial because people are saying, well, it's filled with inaccuracies about American history and like, oh, well, he's just a left-winged a nut job who hates everybody, who are, and he thinks that all of our presidents are warmongers or war criminals, and then of course the documentary that is linked to this book, that aired on Showtime. People were criticizing that because it was inaccurate and all. But you know what? Those people who say that are actually kind of wrong, because when you read this book, not only does it make sense, but you may think that maybe our history books are filled with controversy or inaccuracy. And maybe this book right here, The Untold History of the United States, should be our history book, and not these other quote unquote history books, or as I like to call them, the real controversial books. So now, and of course, if you've seen my other book reviews, I don't like to give everything away because I think, I would be spoiling it for you. But let me, as I said, let me give you sort of like a back of the book type of review, except maybe a little more, since this book, if you can see, it's actually it's over 800 pages. So, let me go over it with you. Now, before it begins, in the prologue, Oliver Stone actually kind of gives you an introduction on what this book is about. Now, if you've seen his film and his other books, you may sort of you can probably take a guess that it's about history and what goes on behind closed doors, within politics and all. And that's what I sort of guessed, and turns out that I was right, but there was more to it than just politics, because these days, from reading this book, it seemed like these days there's more to it than just American politics, and that there's also, like, politics are now connected with banks and big businesses. And what Oliver Stone and his co-author go through is that, well, what they do is that they actually go to the very beginning of when all of this happened, when the United States started running like a business empire, or running like, where the Federal Reserve was created, and of course, which is basically our central bank, which of course is a violation of the Constitution. And it all began under Woodrow Wilson, which is sort of like the beginning of the chapter, where Woodrow Wilson, got all of these big contractors involved in politics, as well as many oil men. And also he brings up about well, actually, in the prologue, he brings up General Smedley Butler, who was a real war veteran. He had won 2 congressional medals of honor, was a real brave man, and right after his retirement, he had wrote a book called "War is a Racket," where he basically just said war shouldn't happen because when people fight in war, they don't fight for America. They fight for big businesses. Like in his book, he said, "I didn't fight for America's freedom. I fought for the American Fruit Corporation." So now that was released in the late 30s or early 40s, and I remember that because unfortunately, I because I remember reading that he had unfortunately passed away in 1940 at a young age. Actually, he wasn't an old man, when he died. But yeah, so then the book goes through a General Smedley Butler, going and then goes on to Woodrow Wilson, who was, I mean, I'm not saying, and neither is Oliver Stone saying that he was the sole, he was the main man who had created it. It was, it was more people who were involved. A lot of people in his administration, and of course it continued on. And then he goes into like all the other presidents, and of course he also goes into how Woodrow Wilson was not the kind man that we have assumed that he was. He was actually a real sympathizer of the KKK. Even went so far as to have shown the that one KKK film, The Birth of a Nation, at the White House. So then right after that, he goes through other presidents on like how they continued the war machine, and then he goes into a lot of detail about what FDR did during World War II. And by the way, when you get to that part is not just pure gold to what Oliver Stone's theory is. It's also, I mean, for me personally, when I was done reading that part, I felt I used to be, I mean, not the biggest fan of FDR, but I felt like he was a real committed man who wanted what was best for America because he served more than 2 terms, even in poor health. Now, but after reading the FDR part, I kind of felt not 100% anti-FDR, but I don't know. I mean, was he like Hitler? I don't know. But and then of course he goes on with like Harry Truman on how well, and he also explains how Harry Truman became FDR's vice president during his fourth re-election term, and how his other VP Henry Wallace got kicked out because Henry Wallace wanted to focus on more domestic issues rather than foreign policy, yet Harry Truman wanted to expand all of the foreign policy aid. And then he goes on to Eisenhower, who, of course, stepped down the foreign policy. Not a whole lot. Just a bit. And of course, towards the end, where he gave, towards the end of his second term, where he gave his infamous farewell address, where he warned the American people about the military-industrial complex. Now, of course, that was new to the American public. So, not only did they not pay attention, but or I'm not saying that they didn't pay attention. They just really didn't know what to make of it because it was all new. Well, then I guess the American people kind of got a harsh like reminder as to how powerful they are because of what happened on November 22nd, 1963, with the Kennedy assassination. But, of course, that was still not enough to wake up the American public, but it was a starting point. And then from there, after Kennedy was assassinated, well, but even before that, Oliver Stone goes into how Kennedy tried to stop the Cold War machine and that he had failed because they had gotten to him on that tragic day in Dallas, and how and of course on how Lyndon Johnson escalated that probably more than FDR with Vietnam. And of course, Richard Nixon and his sleazy ways, or not him, but people within the CIA, like E. Howard Hunt, who was probably the king of sleaziness. And of course, and it goes on and on. And for me personally, it was more surprising to see that maybe, or to read that maybe there was really no Ronald Reagan revolution, or that Bill Clinton probably was not the peacemaker president that I thought he was. And of course, I knew about the Bush family, on how they were related to Nazis, or maybe not, maybe not the current ones, but of course the old, the first George Bush's father, Prescott Bush, on how he was, in deep connection with the Nazi regime. And then, of course, like towards the end of this book, Oliver Stone examines how Obama, who was the presidential candidate, was presented very, very heavily of being an anti-war candidate, and then once he got into office, it clearly showed that he was not in charge, and that it's the people who are behind the scenes, or in other words, the big businesses, oil men, bankers, and people within the military-industrial complex. So, folks, if you are interested in reading about what is really going on in America, and if you are sick of the lies or the controversy that you find in your history books, if you really want to be educated, please pick up Oliver Stone's The Untold History of the United States. Now, why is it Untold, or The Untold? It's because it has been kept away and locked up with by the government to keep it away from the American people, because I don't know, are they afraid? Well, if they're afraid, can't they just intimidate them? Well, unless a big grassroots protest comes up, we will still be uninformed. But of course, there is an alternative to all that. Read a book like this. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope that you pick up the book, and I hope to see you at the bookstore.